I'm just gonna say I didn't actually read. I just watched the Jordan Peterson review.
No, dude, dude. I caught a clip of him saying that it was on like a Rogan episode, and I caught a clip of him saying, he's like, well, you know, the thing about Dostoyevsky, or he's like, Notes from Underground is profound critique of the left, and I was like, what? I mean, honestly, is there anything? I know we're only talking about, like, Giffin and I have read section one or like part 1 and 2, and we're only talking about part 1. But honestly, is there like, there's nothing in here that seems like an overt critique of the left. This is like a very existentialist personal novel.
I kind of disagree, actually.
Okay.
Well, it would have been the liberals of the period.
Well, sure.
I mean, like the perfectibility of man, I guess, in a sense, is more like a left concept, I suppose. So,
yeah, but to be like, Dostoyevsky was absolutely devastating. It's like, I don't know. Maybe we'll disagree with this, but I don't think that this is an overtly political text at all.
I think it is. So
really?
I'm curious.
Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
I absolutely do.
Wait, in the sense that like human nature is wrapped up in politics, or in this, because I think that this,
in the sense that he was writing this knowing that it was going to be perceived as political commentary.
Okay, interesting. I don't really think that this is kind of widely regarded as the first existentialist novel, and not really a political novel.
Well, it might not be highly regarded as a political, novella, but it's I think it qualifies for certain.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, I need to look at the like history of it again, but I think this was written largely as a response to Chernyshevsky.
Yes, in his book, What Is to Be Done.
Yeah, Lenin's favorite text, but I just can't remember.
Interesting.
Well,
okay.
I guess we can go through it and then kind of discover it. But yeah, I'm pretty certain this is pretty overtly. Well, I don't want to say overtly. The Russians at the time couldn't talk that overtly, but yeah, I think it's political.
That's so interesting, because there's this paper, or it's like a short story called I don't remember if it's called like The Nose. Yeah, Gogol has this story called The Nose. It's a novella as well. It's like 66 pages, and it was written in 1836. So right around this. Yeah.
This was written in 66, right?
Okay. Because the interesting thing is
maybe
that
64.
Notes from Underground was written in 1864.
Okay.
So the interesting thing is that I actually saw like a small bit of parallels between the two stories, and we could read The Nose if we wanted to, actually, by Gogol. It's a funny short story.
I wouldn't be opposed. Yeah.
Yeah, and also clearly this is like literary. You know what I mean? So it's not just like a political response. So he meant it to be both. So I'm sure he did draw. If you see parallels, he very well could have drawn from that short story. But I agree with Giffin. I think it is very much, there was like a political movement at the time, of just scientism and just the perfectibility of man, and
utopianism broadly.
The downfall of atheism, according to Professor Peterson.
Yeah, it's definitely not that. So
no, obviously it's not that. And I mean, what we can, like the version that I have has the second chapter of the Brothers Karamazov, and to summarize that as being like a deadly critique of atheism, as Peterson does, is like even more absurd and even more wrong, which we can read that. Okay, well I'm even more interested to talk about this now, because honestly, I don't think I read the part 1 of this, and politics really did not come up at all for me in like mentally. I'm saying reading this. Well, I guess let's just go through it and we'll see. Like I was gonna say, we can talk about it very asynchronously, because it's not like a narrative in the way that the second part is.
Yeah, I think
it'd be a good idea to kind of start off like just kind of describing what we think it was.
We have to start at the beginning.
Yeah,
or just kind of like a broad overview of like what you thought it was. Like I could start.
Yeah.
So like the way I interpreted this here, I think he just kind of opens, and this is actually isn't related to like the second half of what he gets into, but he first kind of begins to opine about, hyper consciousness and, kind of what it means to be almost paralyzed by your own thoughts in a sense. And just how inaction can lead from just overthinking and, to quote, like, men of action, this is just paraphrasing, of course, but men of action are ultimately, fools, because they aren't considering primary causes and aren't, truly kind of like following like this chain of logic mentally, but ultimately just act. They act. They don't think, because the moment you start acting is the moment you've stopped thinking. So
they're beasts in some sense.
So I think that's how he kind of opens, but then he kind of gets into his critique, which is more so the idea that men are ultimately not rational. And that we are moving toward creating a completely rational system. And the idea that men can operate happily within this and can align desires perfectly with reason is ultimately like, kind of like, it's not only like impossible in his mind, but it's undesirable. So I'm probably missing things, but that's kind of how I viewed like part one. So, but I'm sure you could add to that. So.
No, I mean, I think that's good. There was also a vein of sort of like, there was a type of absurdism or sort of paradoxicalism that he was comfortable with also, where he would say things. It was, I don't want to summarize it as contradictions, because that makes it sound like we're, like finding like in the Bible or something where, it's like faith without works is dead, but then it's like on belief alone. It's not that kind of a contradiction, but he'll do things where it's like, he'll say things along the line of, I acted on spite and spite alone. And then he says, gentlemen, when I said that was spite, I'm sure you believed me, but it was all a lie, something like that, where he'll sort of like, he'll offer you this insight and then take it away again in a way in which I think it's kind of weird, because he talks about that like paralyzation from this obsession overthinking things through and doing that to the point where it's not clear if he's sort of like worked his way into being contemptuous of men of action because he can't be, or if he like genuinely thinks that men of action are, there's like a weird tension between, is he castigating something that he actually deeply wants to be? And in some sources, it seems like it's yes. And then there's other texts in which it seems like, no, he genuinely thinks it would be bad for me to be a man of action,
Yeah,
he definitely does say both. Like, just to kind of like buttress that point real fast. I mean, he says he references, kind of like a famous, I believe it was like a pirate, like Lafitte. Was that the name of like? But regardless, it was some sort of like hedonistic figure, and was saying like, what if I were to like embody that figure? You could say something positive about me. There are positive attributes that you could attribute to my lifestyle, and it would be a way of life that we're not saying positive or negative in the sense that we're morally evaluating like that lifestyle, but it's just that it can be described that way of life.
Yeah, so that'd
be good for me, but yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I found two about the man of action. I found like two quotes. So I also just read an online version from Project Gutenberg, so I don't have proper pages like you guys might.
Okay, so just say sections. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's part or section chapter 3 of part 1. It says in like quote in parentheses, it says by the way, facing the wall of such gentlemen, that is the direct persons and men of action are genuinely nonplussed. For them, a wall is not an evasion, as for us people who think and consequently do nothing. So in this case, he seems to be like critiquing the people who are doing nothing and kind of like addressing a positive attribute of the men of action. But then later, part 5, and he says, I repeat with emphasis, all direct persons and men of action are active just because they are stupid and limited. So,
yeah. And it's true. And he says that, you know, consciousness is, you know, like perhaps like one of like the greatest curses, like, but
he calls it a disease, right?
A disease, but men wouldn't give it up for anything. So like later on, so he's saying that, like, you know, even though he's hyper conscious in this sense, he wouldn't give it up for anything, you know, even if it were to result in him being a man of action. So yeah, he is sort of kind of like straddling that fence a little bit. So
yeah, he flirts with like a direct contradictory, just almost vomiting of his this reads like it would read if you like smoked a joint, drank a lot of caffeine, and then just had a stream of consciousness, you know, like Word document.
And I think he's also really conscious of, like,
I would imagine,
like Rousseau of like Rousseau's autobiography, right? Like Confessions, in the sense, like, I mean, he references it later on, and upon rereading like part 1, to be honest, I was kind of looking out for that, and I thought that honesty was like one of his highest priorities when writing this. So I think just kind of exposing kind of his, you know, the contradictions within him, kind of his neuroticism thinking, I think that was his best way of showing honesty in part 1 here. So
which is weird too, because there's almost a meta like sense of another level of contradiction where he is both decrying and then almost sort of like not praising but wishing that he could be a man of action. But he talks about this it's close to the end of part 1.
Actually, just briefly while you're looking for that, I think it might be worth mentioning, maybe to people who haven't read it yet, but you know, whenever we're talking about he, like the author of the diary, author of the notes is, you know, a distinct person from Dostoyevsky, right? So if we do want to talk about Dostoyevsky's philosophy, we might want to separate that.
But it also is Dostoyevsky, though.
Yeah,
like it is, like, it's just like
you couldn't write this if you didn't experience this to some degree.
And there's so many parallels that like he just writes throughout part 1 with himself. Like, for example, just like he's like, yeah, you wouldn't write this way. I guess just to kind of paraphrase what he said, but he was saying like, okay, you would write this way too had you emerged from the underground and seen what had come to fruition, you know, in the last 40 years that I've missed. And think about the last 40 years of just scientific development in his life, right? So it's like, I think much of this kind of came to a head around this point, and he had, you know, really been exposed to much of this thinking that had emerged because of recent scientific development. So this is his kind of like response to that, and much of like the thinking that it, you know, inspired. So so I definitely think this is his response. So
there was also, I mean, before we like really start to dig into these, because I've kind of have quotes for all of these themes that I thought would be fun to read. There's another theme that we haven't overtly talked about yet, but there is this tension between, he talks about not having any sort of freedom or self-determination or making one's own decisions. And that coincides with, his contempt for men of action. But he also talks about rebelling against that and sort of choosing in spite of those things. And that follows where, you know, he talks about like nothing is ever kind of correct or right or noble in some sense, but yet there's, you know, this mathematical formula or almost like a rational formula that he's pushing back against. So it's again that sort of like quasi paradoxicalist tension between things not being possible, but them also existing and him pushing back against them.
I guess can you expand on that later part right there, the latter part? Like,
Yeah.
like what do you mean by? Because I don't think he thinks it is possible that like what are you saying that he doesn't think is possible?
Because I have a few quotes highlighted. So
Yeah.
okay, so when he talks about not having freedom or self-determination. So yeah, there's this like theme of not having freedom or self-determination or making one's own decisions. And I have a few quotes about that. So he talks about people with strong nerves, and when they're confronted with the impossible, they at once resign themselves. Does the impossible mean a stone wall? What stone wall? Why, of course, the laws of nature. So he's painting the laws of nature as this sort of thing that can't be worked around. And he follows that up with the example that repeats itself over and over, where he says, the law says that 2 times 2 equals 4, and that's a law of mathematics, and you can't refute it. He even says, like, just try refuting it. Now, on page 18 of my copy, he also has, yeah, I'll read this quote because it brings together a few themes. So he says, "Oh, tell me, who first declared, who first proclaimed that man only does nasty things because he does not know his own real interests, and that if he were enlightened, if his eyes were open to his real normal interests, man would at once cease to do nasty things, would at once become good and noble because, being enlightened and understanding his real advantage, he would see his own advantage of the good and nothing else. And we all know that not a single man can knowingly act to his own disadvantage." So, and well, there's the final line of that is actually important. Consequently, so to say, he would begin doing good through necessity. And the idea that he's talking about there, I don't think we've ever talked about it on the podcast, but that goes back to, there's this like Socratic idea that people only act for the good, like people only desire the good and act for the good, and that the problem is that people are always just mistaken about what the good is. And there's this like theme in Dostoyevsky, at least in Notes from Underground, where he's like pushing back against the idea that the good is determined. And he almost seems so there's almost this sense in which he's admitting that that's true in some sense. Like he's drawing parallels between the idea that 2 times 2 equals 4. Mm-hmm. And then he's also kind of connecting that with the whole idea of like, man, as we're sort of scientifically progressing, we're learning more and more about ourselves, right? And he's almost saying like we are approaching this like rational understanding of what is best for us. But then he also has this infatuation with acting against it.
Because he begins to kind of question like, you're kind of describing like, acting to our advantage, right? But advantage with respect to what? Like with respect to prosperity, happiness, a sense of like, completion or certitude. I mean, there are all these different advantages that you could act with respect to. And the question is, even if you were able to tabulate all the advantages that one might value, and would want to act to or towards, do we always still act toward our advantages? Even if you were to like enumerate all the advantages that you wish to act toward, do you always do that? And even if you knew in all cases, okay, like, would there be cases in which you don't act toward your advantage, even if it's, you've enumerated all of them? Like I when I read that, I kind of like imagined like a situation in which, I mean, I don't know if you listened to like one of like the most recent Sam Harris podcasts on like AI.
I don't think so, actually.
I forget the guy's name, but he had a former CEO of Google on there, and we could look up his name later. But regardless, he was talking about.
And he divulged all of your incognito searches.
Yeah. Oh boy. No, but he was talking about, essentially general intelligence or general artificial intelligence kind of bots that could accompany you and could provide like, a greater insight into your own life than you have. Okay, so what if there was such a bot that accompanied you and was able to tell you like, okay, this decision, and could actually tell you on every single decision you're going to make, this acts toward these advantages. This acts perfectly toward the advantages you most value. Will you always kind of, assuming you trust the bot, of course, but will you always act that way? And Dostoyevsky is saying, no, that's not man's nature, in fact, to do that. So he kind of, but what do you guys think of that?
Well, I mean, like one thing to note is that importantly that's, and it's like not the point that Dostoyevsky is making also, but neither of these things are due to weakness of will. And neither of these errors would be due to epistemic errors. So it's like, So
yes.
It's weird. Like the question is like, to what extent can you truly desire the bad? You know what I mean?
But it's not desiring the bad though. Well, it's you desire making a decision
that's not rational. Yeah.
That's not necessarily based purely in reason. Yeah.
So like, I always wonder about these sort of questions because I don't know, like, like just to use a personal example, right? So like applying to grad school and like forfeiting a steady job and like a steady income and like, all the benefits that come with that is like a big risk, right? And so because it's weird, right? It's like there's kind of two versions of the bot that I'm thinking about. One would give me a probabilistic account of what I'm doing and would say there is only like a 17% chance that you will attain like a career in philosophy or something, right? But then there's another version where it's like, okay, you won't actually. Like we've looked into you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's not exactly like a one-to-one example because I would still go anyway. Like I would just want to do like the program, but imagine I didn't, right? Like imagine if I wouldn't be happy with this if I didn't actually get a job in academia. I don't know. It's hard for me to think that I would. If it gave me a probabilistic account.
But it's kind of a cop out with the probabilistic account, though.
Yes,
it's like a big time cop out. Like,
no,
what if
Dostoyevsky's commenting on like the absolute case where it's like this
we can
cannot
determine
feasibly be in your interest, and you say just like grit your teeth in like spite surges through you, and you're like, I'm gonna do it.
Have I ever told you guys about? There's this idea that people will actively rebel against what like reason itself even states, and there's this like doxastic voluntarism about beliefs where you can believe something in spite of the fact that there's no evidence for it. Like you yourself, like a lot of people think that religious belief is like this, where you can be confronted and honestly have no account of how any of this could possibly make sense, right? But you just believe in spite of it. And it's almost like this existential assertion of your freedom to say, like, I believe in it, even though it doesn't make any sense. Like, do you guys, so, okay.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely see the parallel here.
I see the parallel. Okay. I mean, maybe I'm like trying to work backwards. I don't think I have any of those beliefs. Do you guys?
I mean, I definitely could see myself not acting like, I just think it's really, I think Dostoyevsky really does a good job in kind of like just illustrating the fact that it's just not within human nature, or at least it's not within me to just follow decisions purely rationally. Like if you were to tell me like,
no, it's not me either.
But I'm wondering, but I'm saying
yeah.
I have to get back to your case about the grad school thing, okay? You were told with 100% certainty that going to grad school will not be to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like, are you going to, is that like a done decision at that point? Like it's done? Like, or are you kind of like, or is there even like a slight waiver on that point?
Yeah, I think the wavering is the key there.
Because it doesn't matter whether it's
that's true. That's true. Of course, there'd be a wavering, but honestly, what I'm struggling to understand about myself, even introspectively, is that wavering actually due to some like, no, the machine isn't factoring in for something about like my will, or you know what I mean?
You're reassessing like the calculation.
It's
the
almost,
logarithms.
Yeah, it's almost like it's very hard for me to like honestly report. Like, it's very hard for me to honestly report how that would feel, and it seems like I would always regress if I did it. It would always be for this sort of back in my mind hunch of it's got to be wrong somehow, or like I don't know, something, you know.
But the point is that like, what if this machine was there for every decision of your life?
They had a perfect track record. Yeah,
you know what I mean. So the point is that you know, the machine's always going to be there and is always going to tell you which decision ultimately, like even like the facade of desire kind of drops away. I mean, I just like to feel to an extent that like will does essentially align with just pure reason at some point in the end there, if you always just follow what the machine says. To your advantage or maximizes it.
This goes back to the Bernard Williams critique of utilitarianism that I was talking to you guys about. Remember where he says that like there's sort of, you have like a disappearing person. If you're only maximizing utility, then the person sort of disappears.
Very similar idea. Yeah,
it's a very similar idea. Honestly, I would sign up for that bot in a second if I could turn it on and off.
Right.
You know, like it would be really.
I mean, that's just like having an oracle next to you. At that point, it's like, oracle. Like, what are the odds of me doing this?
Well, because like, I mean, this starts to get into the other theme, but we've all experienced like things that are very straightforward decisions to make, and then we've all experienced decisions that are extremely difficult to make, right? I get the sense that I would never bother consulting that oracle for decisions that I was confident about, but I would be very tempted, if not actually like delight in turning it on for the difficult ones. I don't know.
I'd be tempted.
Not even, I actually don't even think tempted was the right word for me to use there. I think I would readily do it. Like if I'm genuinely conflicted about like what the right thing
I mean,
to do
even in like the confident case.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, if this thing has like knowledge, it's like you can't really hold the belief that you have more knowledge than it. You kind of want to double check your work, Yeah,
there's something. So I guess I am pulled by Dostoyevsky's point that I don't know. It'd just be obviously what's going to happen is going to happen. But there's something very annoying that I feel about not being able to live through I don't know. It just depends. It
reminds me of like the Niels Christie papers to an extent, in an odd way, where it's
conflict is property.
Instead of conflict as property, it's almost like the facade of a decision as property.
The facade of free will as property.
No, actually though.
Yeah.
Actually though, which I think is actually very important to like the human experience, and I think Dostoyevsky agrees. I definitely agree with him on that point.
Can I read a quote about? Okay, so he says, "Bah, gentlemen, what sort of free will is it? Or what sort of free will is left when we come to tables and arithmetic, when it will all be a case of 2 times 2 makes 4?" So he's pointing that we're going to be able to like calculate out what the utility maximization is there. And he says, 2 times 2 makes 4 even without my will. But then he says something really interesting. As if free will meant that. And that's almost like I read that as a very kind of compatibilist turn almost in him, where he was saying, okay, so
I did too, by the way.
Okay. Because I take it there, he's saying he's almost like he's looking at the sort of like agent causal libertarian's wet dream, right? And he's saying like my will is like, there's this idea that people are drawn to, that their will is so powerful that they can override the laws of nature, whether that's like could have done otherwise, or 2 times 2 might actually be 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then, he points out obviously as the incompatibilist will that there's like the hard incompatibilist will, no, you don't have that power. But then when he says as if free will meant that, what's the analog there for? I don't know what the analog there is for the utility maximization, because I take it that he's kind of pointing towards that struggle, like the libertarian struggle almost, of saying, I can almost make things rational by like my pure will to do, right? And then there's you could imagine like a very, I don't know, like Richard Dawkins-esque kind of person where it's just like, let's just sit back and just all live by the utility calculus. What's the compatibilist position there?
I just had a thought. Let me get it back here on that one. But yeah, I mean, I think like he definitely acknowledges it. Like I kind of like later in the first part that, okay, well, we'll say that in fact we don't have free will, right? It actually doesn't matter. What's important to the human experience is at least the perception that we have free will, like the perception that we do make decisions, that that life isn't reduced to some utility calculation. So, and that life and decisions don't always need to align perfectly with, utility maximization in a sense. It's not that, if it does, that's a bad thing. In some cases, it's that the idea that it should always align perfectly, it really kind of destroys the human experience. I mean, I think like that's very clear in his later writing, like in the part whenever he talks about, okay, like part of being human is being creative and like, kind of like, creation and exploration are both, fundamental components to being human. But as he's saying, like, as we're building this road, I mean, do we really, like, as we get closer to the destination, is that somewhere where we actually want to end up? Like we all agree that like the process of science is fantastic, but where do we end up when we understand everything perfectly?
And he says, doesn't he conclude from that thought that the end is never what we actually desire. It's always the process or the journey to the end. And yes. That's like a very Buddhist point of him to say, where it's the attaining of the goal is synonymous with the moment of kind of unsatisfactoriness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like there's kind of nothing that's worse than, I don't know, in some sense, because there's like the moment of accomplishment, which is absolutely, wonderful. And like, but as soon as that peaks, it's synonymous with just like the loss of the entire process to it.
Exactly. And, he, in one sense, he'll call it boredom. And in another passage, he calls it death.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's, I kind of agree to an extent. I mean, what would life be like where every decision you make is influenced by, a knowledge base that is absolute and unerring? Well, I mean, it's certainly going to look very, very different than how we live our lives now. And is that preferable? So
that's why I was almost wondering if I could get that on-off switch to it.
Would you turn it off?
Well, I would turn it on and off. I want even more than that. I'm saying like I want on and off and on and off. Like I want.
No. I'm saying would you turn it off ever though? Like if you started to live your life through the direction of this bot, and it was maximizing different advantages that you most valued.
I could see a scenario in which I would. Okay, so like, say I really want to go to grad school. I really want to go to Houston in particular. I'm like, But there's this nagging thought in the back of my mind: is Virginia Tech actually the right move? I think it's Houston, but am I wrong? I flip on the bot. Hey, is it Houston? It like whispers back, yes. Okay, I'm like, great. I just slam it off again. Like that's all I wanted. You know what I mean? Because I could imagine it would. How much would it suck? Okay, so I get to Houston. Like I'm trying to work on this specific paper idea that I have about critiquing Summers' account of the objective attitude, right? That's something that I've just been like really interested in. I just presented at this conference, right? Okay, so I'm getting there. I'm trying to work on it, but I accidentally had flipped the bot on. Like I didn't realize it, and it just chimes in. Working on this paper will not be to your advantage, and I'm like, I'd be like, okay, well, like what is then? It would be like presenting some counterexample to a Gettier case. I'm like, I don't really want to work on that. I'd be like bummed out. Do you know what I mean?
And but even then though, you might not be necessarily bummed out because you'll know that if it's to your advantage, then you'll be happier and more fulfilled through that. But in a sense though, I do understand why you'd be bummed out because you've lost your decision making, or at least the facade of it. So and that's why Dostoyevsky makes some pretty good points here.
It's a good novella.
Yeah.
I was imagining it even like what would the experience be like if you were kind of like keeping it on? Because Jordan, you make a good point of like, if you flipped it on and you kind of like discovered that like one of your hopes was dashed, that can be something that, is a trade-off. You might discover that there's an advantage to doing the other thing greater than what you were hoping to do, maybe. And in exchange for that, you kind of feel bummed, right? That's not really to your advantage, or is that, you wouldn't value that perhaps, like the negative feeling at least. But what if you just kind of like keeping it on actually just directed you towards like almost like a fluttering, like blissful state, just like always kind of like at that little like precipice of like, ooh, like just like if it was able to maximize your utility to that extent, like kind of like just constantly like directing you towards like little pleasures while you're towards these greater goals. Like if that was what it was like, that's I think the real question, because that's the thing that I was imagining that would be like addicting. It's like, can you really turn it off if you like even in the case where like I think if you use it long enough and you turn it off, you'd kind of be frightened by uncertainty. But even in the case where like that wasn't the case, like if you weren't used to it yet, I feel like there'd be like, especially if it can do that like in the short and long term, just kind of like really just maximize efficiently without these kind of like grand dashed hopes. I think that would be the scenario, right?
And also if you kept it on for long enough constantly, you would probably begin to enter into this weird harmonious groove with the machine.
That's
where you would delight in sort of whatever it told you.
Yes,
that's exactly what I was imagining.
Yes, like you would lose your own. Like when I said, I'd be bummed out. Yeah, because so when I said I would be bummed out, it's because I was only consulting the machine,
right,
kind of sporadically.
Because you had kept the choice.
I would almost but imagine if I had kept it on for the past 18 years, I would just arrive at Houston like waiting to see what it told me to do.
No, like that's really it. Like
yes.
Because once you've kind of like given away like the hope, it's just kind of like this. It's like taking soma, I think is what it'd be like, just the constant like blissfulness almost, right? Like that's what it could deliver. Like not just like it can tell you like based on some like rational argument, but it can make you feel that way too.
And this is there's actually
like your utility is informed by that, right?
I just realized that there's a direct parallel too between this whole point and the experience machine, where on one hand, it's extremely irrational for you to not enter the experience machine because it can give you exactly the life that you want. And if you need struggle, if like you're that kind of person that needs to fight against something, it can give you the perfect amount of struggle, where it's just like, this is this will take all your strength, but you will overcome it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I get the impulse. I get both impulses there, where it's just like a life of bliss in that machine would be amazing, but none of it would be real in some sense, where it's just, and it's the same thing with this, where
it's the realness is the freedom to choose,
a
or
life,
at least the
like a life guided by this machine would be better than a life without it. Yet there's something extremely disturbing about it.
Yeah. So if we want to I don't know. We said we were okay with jumping around. I was going to
Wait,
talk
wait,
about.
wait.
Yeah.
I had a variation real quick.
No, please.
What about a machine that only gave you a green light, a yellow light, or a red light? So whenever you were considering doing something, so the yellow light would almost never come on, and it may in fact never come on. So that would be if you were truly breaking neutral. But what if there was just like a red or green indication where you were kind of considering like choosing this thing to do or moving into this apartment or entering this program, and you just turned and all you saw was a little green or red. Like it didn't tell you how much it would maximize. It didn't tell you how much it would minimize.
It's like just directionality kind of thing?
Just directionality.
Yeah, no way. I mean, I feel like you were like a slave at that point.
Oh, yeah. Actually,
Wait, more so than the original idea?
No, not
Oh,
more so
okay,
than the
okay.
original idea. But you seem to have like, because I was a no way on the first example, and then this one just seems like a step down, and I'm just like less of a slave. But I just feel like I would be completely dependent on whatever that would tell me for anything. And in my current situation right now, it's like, I certainly don't feel that way as I operate, throughout my daily life. Like whether we, get into like, ultimately whether I am or not, but I don't feel that way. That's not my perception as I, kind of move about my daily life. So it would be a completely different experience.
Yeah, I was actually going to make a comment because I think Rick and Morty did an episode on this where
did they?
Morty gets like that crystal that he attaches to his head, and he just kind of like moves left to right until he discovers like the end goal that's like preferable. He just kind of like just fumbles his way towards whatever he needs to do to get to that end. Did you guys see that episode?
I recall that one now.
Yeah, because it's the one where he has that device, and it's like the green, is in the one direction, and he just had to like keep stepping like left. Oh no, farther to the left. Oh no.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
It's like literally every waking moment, he just like humming. Well, in the episode, it was like Jessica. That was like literally like humming that to himself and just like taking steps, like discovering the words he's saying just by trial and error through the alphabet.
Yeah. Just
yeah.
It was a very good episode.
That's exactly. Well, maybe not exactly, but I think that's pretty close to what we were describing with this machine.
Yeah.
Would you affix the crystal to your skull?
I cut one of you off, and I don't remember who though. It was you, Giffin?
Oh, I was going to bring up the quote where he talks about the differences between like the advantage and then the more advantageous than any other advantage. Just like kind of wrapping up what we were just discussing. This is for me. I guess it's in chapter 8.
Why don't you just read that one off? Then?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find a good place to like start because it's kind of like a bulky thing.
No, for sure.
Such a decisive commitment to action there. Why don't you just read it?
well, it's like flip around and it's just like
what does the paragraph start with?
Yes. Okay. So I'll start here. I'm paralyzed by indecision. Hyper consciousness, So actually, I'll just read it from here.
You yourself are a bit of an underground man.
I am an underground man in many respects right now. Sorry, I'm like really trying to find a good place because like the way it's like written is like so like meandering. It's like he doesn't just say like the thing. He like is like weaving in and around the point for 2 paragraphs.
A few gentlemen's thrown in here and there.
Yeah.
Be a man of action, though.
While you're looking for it, though, I love my favorite quote though in this one is when he's just like damn underground after he like I gotta find that one.
My favorite line was when he exclaims like I want to send these logarithms to the devil.
Oh yeah. I mean the opening line is classic too. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man.
No, that's absolutely classic. Okay, so I'm gonna start reading. It's gonna be a little bit of a text, but I think it'll be really worth discussing. So at the top of this is like really close to the beginning of chapter 8. He goes, you decide. Our choice is usually mistaken from a false view of our advantage. We sometimes choose absolute nonsense because in our foolishness, we see that nonsense, the easiest means for attaining a supposed advantage. When all that is explained and worked out on paper, which is perfectly possible, for it is contemptible and sensible and senseless to suppose that some laws of nature man will never understand, then certainly so-called desires will no longer exist. For if a desire should come into conflict with reason, we shall then reason and not desire, because it will be impossible retaining our reason to be senseless in our desires, and in that way knowingly act against reason and desire to injure ourselves. Right. So that's kind of like where he's positing the kind of conflict there between like the reason and the desire.
Just so I'm clear.
Yeah.
So he's just pointing to what is essentially the opposite of a weak-willed action, where you know what the right thing to do is, but the desire overcomes the reason. He's saying like when we reach this kind of algorithm level understanding, then reason should overcome desire, right?
I'm not even sure like overcome, right? It just aligns.
Just like
alignment. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
This is more of an exploration of like the idea of advantage. Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead then to like where he actually just tries to unravel that like seeming contradiction.
Okay.
He goes, this is a little bit further down. Okay. So easy sentence. I suspect, gentlemen, that you are looking at me with compassion. You tell me again that an enlightened and developed man, such, in short, as the future man will be, cannot consciously desire anything disadvantageous to himself, that can be proven mathematically. I thoroughly agree it can, by mathematics, but I repeat for the 100th time, there is one case, one only, when man may consciously, purposely desire what is injurious to himself, what is stupid, very stupid, simply in order to have the right to desire for himself even what is very stupid, and not to be bound by any obligation to desire only what is sensible. Of course, this very stupid thing, this caprice of ours, may be in reality, gentlemen, more advantageous for us than anything else on earth, especially in certain cases. And in particular, it may be more advantageous than any advantage, even when it does us obvious harm and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reason concerning our advantage. For in any circumstances, it preserves for us what is most precious and most important, that is our personality, our individuality. So that's kind of like I don't want to say it's like the final conclusion, but that seems like where he kind of lays it on the table. And this is also where it blends into the politics. Because he's basically staking a claim in the individuality as opposed to like the collectivism. Kind of he wraps those kind of two, the existentialism and the politics into one exclamation there.
I actually do see now how that interplays, the connection between politics and existentialism.
Yeah. And had I ever read What Is to Be Done by Chernyshevsky, I might even be more obvious, but
I think it's considered one of the worst pieces of writing ever.
Is it really that bad?
Yeah. So
I know it was one of the most influential, if only by the fact that Lenin was influenced by it.
And that's primarily the reason. But otherwise, it's considered
worthless.
It's
not worth reading.
It's just like not meritorious like literature. Okay. It's just considered very, very, very bad. It's like almost like a picture book in a sense. There are like lots of like illustrations and like short little paragraphs, and it's a lot of propaganda. So
interesting. I actually didn't know that, or at least hadn't heard that strongly stated. But
it was extremely popular.
Yeah, so this is kind of what he's discussing here is kind of like the idea of advantage. There's either this super advantage that like, I mean, it sounds like what is being claimed here is like the super advantage is like, greater than any other, discussion of advantage thus far, is kind of like preserving the choice, preserving the individuality of man, right? It is just... And he actually later claims that, it is profitable and sometimes even praiseworthy to maintain it, even in spite of reason. But this is so the soup that just, I think it's just an exploration of like what is at the time it would have been like when people are making these kind of like rationalist claims, like it will be, found that it's like a logarithm. You can simply discover what it is. It kind of ignores the advantage to be found, like that's more subtle and yet greater, according to Dostoyevsky, in just like that feeling of choice, the knowledge of individuality, and that it's mankind's nature to assert for himself, like in spite or in whatever you want to describe it, that feeling.
Yeah, and like the algorithm would be discounting that freedom because it can't factor it in.
Yeah, I mean, we're thinking of like, we're using like kind of a machine example at the time. I don't know that he would have done that. It's more like just that
is what he was going towards.
Yeah. I don't think he would, like, given what we know now about like technology, I don't think he would object. I mean, it's not like any math equation would tell you, which is going to maximize like what, like what decisions. It would have to be extremely advanced technology.
Yeah, and this is kind of but this is kind of like where it bleeds into where it bleeds into politics is kind of obvious, because I claimed it was as opposed to like the collectivism. But in this kind of expression of the advantage, it kind of like is rebutting the idea that we can hold the idea in our head that we can recognize that another person is doing something disadvantageous almost. It like at least seeds a kernel of doubt, right? Like what can be, whenever you're criticizing someone else, like, you're clearly doing something disadvantageous toward yourself. And we do this all the time. Like, I know I do it all the time. You'd see it in other people. You see it in, political policy, anything. It's like these can be seen as a set of disadvantageous things that people are just doing that we can correct. So he's critiquing that in a way.
And he's sort of wrong in a sense, though, right? Because like, especially like his section, actually, this is a very interesting point. So I'm glad we got to this one here. But
this is the highlighted part for me.
Yeah, I found it really interesting when he was talking about how, in the civilized era or this civilized age, people are no less bloodthirsty than they were, 2,000 years ago, and that, the fact that people are as bloodthirsty now as they were, but considering that they're more hyper-conscious than they were, just makes it all the more egregious that we are as bloodthirsty as we are. And I look at society now and I say, that's actually not true. Because he was saying, like, in that section, I don't know exactly where it was, but he was saying, well, all civilization has done for us is it's broadened the experiences that we have. Like the sensations that we are privy to, it's now like a broader array of sensations. And bloodthirstiness is one of them, but now we have an entire new array given, how society has become more complex. But I found that really interesting because in a way we've actually like excised a lot of I guess bloodthirstiness by not exposing the population to it. So in a sense, it's almost like the array of sensations we have been privy to. Honestly, violence is not really one of them, at least given our upbringing, right? Like we were not exposed to great levels of violence, and therefore we are not privy or not disposed to being violent.
Well,
or less so, or like there are also cultural values that have, go ahead.
No, I was just commenting on where exactly this was because I didn't really view it. Well, I'm not saying it's wrong, but whenever I was reading it, I wasn't viewing it through the lens of like our place in society. I think it seemed like more observations of, the sum of humanity, right? Like I wasn't considering the fact that we kind of didn't grow up in a pocket of violence. It was more like you can think about, even in the last like 50 years, just, something like Vietnam, like horrendous levels of violence, even if, we're not perpetrating, we're not directly exposed. I mean, we didn't live through it. But it's just kind of like invoking the notion that, previously it wasn't considered, in poor taste to engage in like things like warfare. Now it actually is, but it is still done. And I think even though you bring up the point fairly that we aren't directly like involved or exposed to it, we kind of do offer like some little raindrop of consent.
We do,
in our actions.
but we do, but it's not the same because I think
I know.
yeah. No, because my point here is this: it's not that he said that we still engage in war and they used to engage in war. It's that there's a certain aspect of our personality that he's addressing: the bloodthirstiness, the desire to cause pain and get enjoyment from it. And I would say in modern civilization, those who exist, like, in much of the West, don't in fact have that attribute. Like that isn't something I would actually like condemn modern civilization for. Not that, I mean, we have drone strikes and stuff like that. War continues. But,
I see what you're saying.
But you get what I'm saying there?
I know. I hear your point more specifically. Jordan seems like he has a point though.
Yeah.
But could it be that it has been attenuated in the way in which that impulse is expressed?
Jordan, that was my exact.
Sure.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that like
it can be manifest differently.
Yeah, because I mean, that's because the problem is that the consequences, in some sense, have become much worse of being violent, right? I mean, there was a way in which you get into a bar fight in like mid 19th century Russia, you just be killed, right? That's probably that's probably not going to happen if you get into a bar fight now. But in some sense, we've criminalized violence to the extent where, like, I mean, you could make a not absurd argument that we've overdone it, right? To the point where, like, if you stand up for yourself in school, like you're getting bullied or something, right? And you just like punch the bully in the face, you'll be expelled, right?
Yeah, it's not excessive violence that we tap down on. It's just the
violence,
concept, the notion of violence.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if like that makes people express it in different ways, like, just like crude chants. I mean, no matter what you think of like Hillary Clinton or her politics, the chant to like lock her up is this sort of expression of the same impulse.
Yeah, I don't know if you're right about the bloodthirstiness, but I think there's the underlying motivation for bloodthirstiness that kind of remains and finds expression.
I kind of want to push back on that a little bit because I heard both of you and I thought the points were really good, but I want to analyze it exactly in like how he's using this critique, right?
Because where is this exactly? So I can like read
yes, we can go exactly to it, but let me make the first, then we can search exact wording here. But his argument essentially is that fundamentally human beings have not changed in the last 2,000 years. We have not changed and we will not change. Fundamentally, human nature.
Right? Okay.
Human nature. Okay.
Yeah.
And
obviously he was experiencing change, but it's the human nature underlying it.
Yeah, the human nature underlying it.
Yeah.
And I would say that modern civilization, given how, even if, I think Jordan brought up a good point in the sense that, okay, well, what if, some of like those same underlying, like the same impetus is being redirected toward different behavior, still deleterious behavior, but different behavior.
Yeah.
Not necessarily bloodthirsty, but different.
Twitter trolling, something like that.
Whatever. Ooh. But the point is
toxic, but non-violent. Well,
my point though is like, I definitely think that stands in contrast to his point that there's no real perfectibility of man if in fact we can, redirect human nature to less deleterious effects, in the sense that, like, I mean, is it really bloodthirsty to be, like in the same way as like Cleopatra sticking pins.
Oh yeah, the pins,
right?
No, that person
chanting for Clinton. I mean, no doubt, Jordan, you're right. That is bloodthirsty. You know what I mean? Like, I don't disagree, but it's very, very different. Like,
it expresses itself in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
No, you make a good point. If we can, let's hone in on the language here. Yeah, I'm curious.
Okay.
Like, he may be making a stronger claim.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick then while we're doing this.
Sounds good.
If you
while I find the page.
Yeah. We got time.
Yeah, because this was something I kind of like. I mean, I loved this first part here.
It was. I loved it as well. It was. I found it pretty funny, honestly. Just like like you mentioned, the confession style suited itself towards like both insight and comedy, right? Like
yeah.
the neuroticism comes through, but also the like little tinge in your mind whenever you're like feel some sympathy, or like you're like, oh, I've seen the behavior myself. Good Lord.
I know.
It was really, because I read this. You remember when I was in Seattle? That's where I got the book.
Yes.
There was like a small local bookstore my aunt showed me, and I picked up a couple of things, including Warren. Well, no, not Warren. I picked up Crime and Punishment. I'm sorry.
Dude, I want to read that next. By the way, I'm gonna start.
I read it over winter. Yeah. Oh, I don't think I ever told you this, but so you remember I was trying to read War and Peace.
Yeah.
I couldn't get through it. I literally put it down and it stayed down at page like 100, like in 20 or something. Like it was like right shortly after, like it gets to like the war part.
Yeah.
And I finally figured out why too. Because I think I mentioned to you, but like the version of Notes from Underground that you're reading, as well as the versions of the Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment that I picked up, were all from like, these modern translators, and their translations, they were done in like either the late 90s or the early 2000s or something. They're fantastic. It was such an easy read going through Crime and Punishment with that. And I was looking back at War and Peace, and it was the translator was Constance Garnett, who wrote the translation in like 1916. It was, I like literally was like I was trembling through like passages originally. Like I had to like reread sentences. Like it was bad. I wasn't sure if I could read after like trying to read through War and Peace. Then I realized like that they have also done like the modern translators, that pair have done one for War and Peace. So I'm going to try again at some point, but with a proper translation, because Constance Garnett cannot do it for me. This was written for a time when women couldn't vote.
Yeah, no, at least the one Jordan picked up for me of Notes from Underground here. This is a pretty good translation.
I thought it was excellent.
It's very readable. It's not like it's,
and you still have my copy, right?
I have to give you your copy back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It would be nice for part 2, especially because it's longer.
You'll go on memory alone, or you won't join.
Well, no, that's why they have those Peterson's YouTube clips. I'll do 10 minutes before the podcast.
That we did that for the Communist Manifesto also.
That's all you need.
Did you find the quote?
Yeah, I did. But is it okay to read the whole page?
Can you tell
That's
me
what I did? Yeah.
Can you tell me what section it's in? Because
21. In page 21
of our copy.
I don't have pages.
Then you'll know nothing.
It's in section 7.
There we go. Okay.
And
this had one of my favorite quotes.
Oh, this is where the Crystal Palace. Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, just read the whole page.
Definitely.
It's too meandering to not.
Okay, so after all, to maintain even this theory of the regeneration of mankind by means of its own advantage is, after all, to my mind, almost the same as to claim, for instance, with Buckle, that through civilization, mankind becomes softer and consequently less bloodthirsty and less fitted for warfare. Logically, it does not seem to follow from his arguments. But man is so fond of systems and abstract deductions that he is ready to distort the truth intentionally. He is ready to deny what he can see and hear just to justify his logic. I take this example because it is the most glaring instance of it. Only look about you. Blood is being spilled in streams, and in the merriest way, as though it were champagne. Take the whole of the 19th century in which Buckle lived. Take Napoleon, both the great and the present one. Take North America, the Eternal Union. Take farcical Schleswig-Holstein, and what is it that civilization softens in us? Civilization only produces a greater variety of sensations in man, and absolutely nothing more. And through the development of this variety, man may even come to find enjoyment in bloodshed. After all, it has already happened to him. Have you noticed that the subtlest slaughterers have almost always been the most civilized gentlemen, to whom the various Attilas and Stanko raisins could never hold a candle? And if they are not so conspicuous as the Attilas and Stanko raisins, it is precisely because they are so often met with, are so ordinary and have become so familiar to us. In any case, if civilization has not made men more bloodthirsty, it has at least made him more abominably, more loathsomely bloodthirsty than before. Formerly, he saw justice and bloodshed, and with his conscience at peace, exterminated whomever he thought he should. And now, while we consider bloodshed an abomination, we nevertheless engage in this abomination, and even more than ever before. Which is worse? Decide that for yourselves. It is said that Cleopatra, pardon the example from Roman history, was fond of sticking gold pins into her slave girls' breasts and derived enjoyment from their screams and writhing. You will say that that occurred in comparatively barbarous times, that these are barbarous times too, because also comparatively speaking, pins are stuck in even now. So, okay, I'll kind of stop there. But
yeah, I think that covers the.
Do you get my point though?
Yeah.
Or do you disagree? Do you think I misread that?
No, I don't.
He seems right. If you think about the jubilation with which men signed up to fight in the Great War, right?
True, but let's examine the 20th century versus now the 21st century. You have to concede there's a major difference now that we've exited the Cold War. It's a very different world now. So he's right for a time period, but is he right now?
That's the thing. It's like I don't know if we are really ready to, because right now we might just be in like a trough,
the
right,
long piece.
Yeah.
But doesn't that, if civilization brings this peace, then even for like a temporary period of time.
There's one level of analysis in which he's absolutely right. I mean, just the fact that like interpersonal violence by any metric has gone down. You know what I mean? And in that way, like he is obviously. Well, I meant just like Dostoyevsky is right if that's what he meant. You know what I mean?
Wait, okay.
Like I'm saying you're right in one objective, obvious sense in which the case of like person on person violence or murders has obviously gone down if you look at just the whole,
Yeah.
That's an interesting, so actually something else sort of came to mind when I first read that, and I'm finding less contextual evidence for it on second reading. What I thought, for whatever reason, that made me think of, and maybe it was that combined with a different passage that I'm not remembering, but it almost made me think about the comfortableness or the ease with which people are okay sanctioning violence, right? Like we'll sign up for, we as sort of a country, people will vote to just look at like the average kind of Republican voter. They'll just very, very confidently say, we should not pull out of Afghanistan. We should not have pulled out of Iraq, and they'll very like easily sanction violence. And he's pointing, there was something in there that made me think that he would be willing to say that, look, it's like people themselves are not engaging in violence, but it's more loathsome in the sense that they almost desire that violence be done more or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely get your point there. Because I think always societies have like outsourced violence, like not the average citizen was like, necessarily like picking up arms and stabbing a neighbor. Like it was always outsourced, and it's outsourced now. Yeah. So people, sanctioned violence 2,000 years ago and they do today. Mm-hmm. But I just also wonder, like, given society, like, I forget where I heard this. It might have been, like, embarrassingly enough, like a Joe Rogan podcast. But
depending on the guest, like the guest is what makes that embarrassing or not.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I'll recall.
I didn't mean to derail,
but yeah, but either way, like the point was made that we just come into less contact with death now, in the sense that people, possibly 200-300 years ago, sooner, I mean, would slaughter the animals, might lose a third of their children, in the first 10 years of life and would have to bury them themselves. It was not uncommon to have to go fight in a war. It was not uncommon to, get into physical, altercations that could, lead to serious harm. And the average person isn't exposed to that death and violence now. And when he asks here, and what is it that civilization, does it soften us? I would say, yeah. I think it does, actually. And he says no, but I say, yeah, I think it kind of has, actually, to an extent.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's allowed itself to be expressed, that sort of softness, in very contemptible ways too.
Sure.
Like the people chanting, lock her up, were, many of them had just like barely left the couch that day,
or even more contemporary.
You know what I mean? So
no, for sure.
He if he would have said that, like, there's going to be a distance, an increased distance between sort of what people desire and what people are capable of, that that seems to be obviously true.
Yeah, then he's just clairvoyant. So just like, because it's exactly what's happened. So, but I think civilization has softened us.
I agree. I almost want to like ask a question about you guys returning back to like previous things that we had talked about.
Sure.
Okay, well, first of all, this is like returning to the that contest between action and contemplation that he was talking about. I guess I'm actually just kind of curious, first of all, to what extent do you relate to Dostoyevsky, and what
do you identify as the man of action or the underground man, as we were asking?
But then, like,
what percentage?
But additionally, like, both where do you fall on that spectrum, and where do you would you want to move yourself either direction? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, whoever wants to venture an answer first.
Yeah, I'll put myself out there. I definitely lean more towards the contemplation. I could use some more action for sure. Like that's just it's my nature. It's just like uncertainty paralyzes me. Yeah. I sit under the boards looking up with the cracks in the floor.
Do you? Because I find myself, like, I'm actually curious. I experience genuine uncertainty fairly rarely. Like, do you guys, or is it like a very common thing?
I think it's pretty common.
Pretty common. So it's pretty uncommon.
Well, it depends on the magnitude, I guess we're referring to. Like,
sure.
Paralyzing. Like, I don't like stop in the middle of my tracks daily. Just like, good Lord,
which brick to step on the road?
Yeah, no, but like, I definitely experience uncertainty frequently, whether it's job related or personally, or just like, minor things throughout the day.
Maybe I should be more clear. Okay, there's one thing that I related to insanely well to, like, what Dostoyevsky was writing, and I hate this about myself. I have this extremely tiring and annoying habit of constantly trying to do things in the most efficient manner. Like, and it sucks because it never actually works because of how much I think about like how to do things efficiently, where and like it doesn't work also because it's tiring. Like it just like wears me out too. Where like if I'm thinking about like what I have to do, and like say there's like multiple errands that have to be run, I will literally think about just like which ones to do in which order that make the most sense. But it's like second nature to me. And honestly, I hate that. Like I in that sense, I'm way too much of an underground man. Like in some sense, because think about it. Like, okay, for that example, if I plan it out perfectly, I save 7 minutes. I'm just making up numbers here.
And you suffer for it.
Yes, and I would literally like mentally suffer for 7 minutes.
I 100% agree. You'll suffer for 9 minutes.
Well, no, I mean, but to gain 7 minutes, I'll suffer for that aim. It's just even if I don't get the 7 minutes, or even if I do get it, it wasn't worth it. Like,
yeah, you plan for 9 minutes, you save 7 minutes, and you suffer.
I see. I don't do that at all.
Really? I do some of that.
I don't do that. I literally have never done that in my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Dude, I wish we could meet in the middle.
Man of action.
A pig.
No, I'd be like, if I've got to go somewhere, I'll just be like, I'm free between 3 and 4, and I've got to do a few things. I just go from one to the next, and I don't really.
No. It gets to the point where if I see other people not doing things, Jordan, I don't know if you do this too, but if I see other people not doing things efficiently, as if they just kind of discard like the notion of efficiency, I just kind of get irritated. And I don't like that.
For me, it depends on the magnitude. Like if I think someone's being overtly irrational, I get extremely irritated. But like, to be honest, I mean,
like I would go to like the shorter things first, like the closer thing. You know, I wouldn't be like, first I drive that all the way there, and then I drive back, but then I go somewhere else. But
yeah, like, it's not like a conscious deliberation. But what you're saying.
Yeah, but there's like I don't actually plan for it.
No,
you know?
dude, it makes me so mad. I hate this about myself. Like, it makes me so irritated. Where I'll literally like, I'll plan out like. And it's so stupid because I try to work in even my own reactions to things. Like I'll just be like, okay, well, I'll be tired after this, so it makes sense to kind of do this afterwards. And like part of me, it's like enough with all this. Just
give me the green light. No, I'll like, follow the green light.
Honestly, the thing that I am looking forward to like so much about from now until when I start Houston is I really want to get that out of my system in a large sense, where this is like a very abnormal time in my life where I can just like do like I really don't have a lot of deadlines or like schedules. You know, like there are things that I need to do, but there's not that kind of a form to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in that way, like I was like just could not relate to Dostoyevsky more in that sense.
Yeah, no, whenever you were gone, I was telling Adam like it was really enjoyable, but like for like the nuanced kind of like relationship you have with like the underground man, because sometimes it's like you just like chastise him, and sometimes you're like, oh, I feel that in myself, like I see myself reflected in the mirror, and he's like an underground man.
Like when he talked about the enjoyment of being slapped across the face, I was sort of like I just couldn't relate to that at all. But then, well, you know, you may desire things in certain rooms that I don't give them.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
Good non-answer, by the way.
I may or may not.
Only the underground man. But like that, I didn't relate to at all. But then when he was talking about that paralyzation of, it's not even that I'm paralyzed, but it's sort of like. There's like that mental tax that I'm constantly paying for it. And it really just bothers me.
I do experience the paralyzation as well.
So when I talked about like when I asked how often do you experience uncertainty, I wasn't talking about that sort of a thing that I was talking where it was like just that stupid, just strategizing and trying to be efficient. Like that's,
yeah, because there's uncertainty within that you try to push through. That's what I was imagining whenever you asked about that. I was like, of course.
So I meant something different then. I'm talking about like there is a decision or an act or like something that actually has to be done. And I am like genuinely struggling to figure out which is the right course or like which is the one I'm going to do. Honestly, the more common experience for me is to know what I want to do or like what I should do. And then it's just sort of like, but it's annoying to do, or I'm tired, or I just don't want to do it. You know what I mean? It's like that's the more common phenomenology for me rather than.
It's more to the latter. Yeah, actually, I don't really have like, I don't typically like deliberate between two things, and I'm like, oh, I can't really decide between these two.
Yeah.
Like I typically know what I should do, and I'm kind of like I'm on board, but I just don't do it because I just like because it's quite unpleasant. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
there's a hefty dose.
I procrastinate like mad. So yeah,
there's a hefty dose of that, but I think I actually do get like the deliberation between the points, just well beyond justification.
Yeah,
I definitely know you do, Giffin.
Yeah, it's like my cardinal sin.
Well, that besides sloth.
No. That was a lesser sin.
It's true. Well, what I was gonna say, Giffin, is like, I mean, I experienced a good bit of that level of actual uncertainty about a few things recently, but like grad school is the one that was most relevant to what I was thinking about. Um, and honestly, like I don't. Okay, a question relevant for both of you, but maybe Giffen more because you experience this more. What makes that a very uncomfortable thing for me, and what I think drives like the existential angst behind a lot of the writing about it in Dostoevsky. At least I'm projecting this onto him. I want to know if you agree. Before a decision has been arrived at, both options are sort of equally real in like a very disturbing way. Like it because what I'm talking about here is like true uncertainty. I'm not talking about weakness of will or epistemic uncertainty. I'm talking about like you have all of the facts on the table and you are going to do whatever you decide to like do, but the actual deciding, like before a decision has been reached, like at least me, I was thinking about like grad school specifically, it's like both options are actually equally as real, which was very disturbing in a lot of ways. Like if I was actually deeply struggling to choose between like, you know, because I was, you guys know I had that huge if then structure and everything, or you know, it's like, okay, if I don't get like funding for Houston or whatever, then it's kind of come down to like VT versus Texas Tech or what, you know. And it like, and I like genuinely was having a difficult time with that, and until I decided, both options were equally as real.
I'm not sure 100% what you mean by real.
Well, like the it was
possible in the sense that you can like imagine them very clearly what your life would look like having, you know, made either decision, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and also this very uncomfortable tension between the fact that a decision has not been made and yet one will be made, and it's not clear to you like yet which you'll choose.
Yeah,
I never get that. I'm not sure.
Really?
Like, I'm not sure I've ever gotten that.
Really? I like I said, I very rarely get it. Honestly, dude, I haven't experienced that for probably years.
Yeah.
Because I haven't had a lot of those, you know, decisions to be made. But like,
yeah, I mean, those are like really big decisions that can cause that. I have experienced what you're describing, although I do like you qualified that statement by saying like you would have all the information. But I think a lot of the part of it for me is just like there's some information that just cannot be had, and that provides angst. So I'm trying to like take that away. And if that's, I think I still experience what you're describing, where like the realness as you described it. But I do think a lot of it for me comes from like the just endless ocean of parameters you can't know. And even, like, you know, you could suffer for like 10,000 aeons and you won't have like with absolute certainty like some information.
Yeah. Because to know all of the information would be to be presented with Dostoyevsky's algorithm in some sense. Yeah, right. You know.
Yeah, to the devil with the logarithms.
Yeah, to the devil with it. I loved that. That quote in particular from what you read though, Adam, where he says, "But man is so fond of systems and abstract deductions that he is ready to distort the truth intentionally. He is ready to deny what he can see and hear just to justify his logic," which I loved, where it's just like,
that's very, very true.
Any blips in the trends, you know, he was talking about this Buckles theory or whatever, you know, any blips in the trend, he would just, you know, it would be one of those like, well, the exception proves the rule. It's like, okay, like, okay, it's unfalsifiable. And I was wondering if that statement there, there was sort of almost like a Borgesian desire in me to read into that statement too, and to even be like, well, you know, to just like bring that statement to bear on what Dostoevsky had written here, where it's like, well, you know, I wonder if there would actually be, you know, he kind of talked about like that, like holding on to that existential freedom of choice, you know what I mean? And I was thinking about that in respect to me wanting to be able to have that algorithm but turn it on and off. Like sometimes it would feel good almost to like relinquish the decision to something, and I was thinking about specifically in those instances of being so existentially unsure, like because every option that you're considering is real.
I see what you're saying.
I think I most aligned like when in the reading with like the part about just feeling spite not toward anyone specifically, but just like this feeling of spite, but also reveling in it to the point where like
Adam just having a toothache in his own house.
Well, let me like finish with this idea though. I don't know if you guys ever do this, but he was describing like not only like reliving moments in which you felt you had been wronged, but also embellishing the details, embellishing the story, and in fact like
this is a very useful
and in fact like making up stories to the point where like things that have never happened but things that could happen just to like it's all like in the sake like for the sake of spite, but it's not directed toward anyone, but it's just like kind of like generate like this emotion. Do you guys
you're gonna love part 2?
Okay, I do this all the time.
No, I used to be like that more than I am now, I think.
Yeah.
I think I used to do that a lot more than I do now. But I think that I haven't, this almost goes back to the violence thing. Like the bloodthirst has just expressed itself in a different form for me. Like I think the impulse that we share is the same there. Like that's at the root of it. But I almost have that instead of looking into the past, I almost have that looking into the future but it's the same thing where I experience almost this sort of like spite, but also what's the exact word I want to use? It's something along the lines of contempt in a spiteful way. And this sort of like, I mean, if you don't manage this correctly, it can be extremely destructive, but like this sort of almost you need something to like push against. Do you know what I mean? I almost have that much more in like a future looking sense at this point, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I go both directions, but it's like, but especially the part about making up stories in your head of just like elaborate complexity of how you've been wronged, but like none of them have happened, but they could happen in the future. So you just derive this sense of spite.
I actually, okay. I remember when we were doing when we were doing the first My Zone competition.
Yeah.
I would become enraged, like literally to the point where I was seeing red by the idea that like someone was cheating to beat me, like that you guys had like given the strap to someone else, and and the thing, like it wouldn't matter if I actually believed it was true or not. I would become like just obsessed with the idea that you guys were doing that, or like just say something else. Like I would just become obsessed with that idea, and it was just like as real as the truth was to me.
Yeah,
I think I lean a little towards Jordan more so. Like I obviously know exactly what you're referring to, like the experience and the way you handle the experience, the emotions you feel and how you respond to them or how you stoke them. But I do feel
I stoke them. I just like
with giant bellows.
With a giant bellow. Yeah.
It's got a team of men pumping the bellow.
Yeah, no, seriously though. It's not healthy at all. When I read that, I was just like, ooh. I'm like,
it's a gut punch.
Yeah.
A birthday text.
I know, right? So I do this so much. I do this so much.
I know you do.
I do it so much, like every day. It's so bad. Every day. It's so unhealthy. But yeah, that's like,
dude. But I do the same. I do the same shit. Like especially, I would do the same thing. This rears its head a lot when I'm trying to get in like the zone to work out, where it's like I will think of like positively immoral things.
This is the balance you were referring to earlier where it can go wrong.
Yeah, but just like because obviously you're not going to do anything, but just to get your head into like a place of just like darkness almost, to like, especially when we're doing these competitions, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm sorry, I think I cut you off, Giffin.
No, I just think this is hilarious. Like, I think, like, I obviously 100%. I don't know about if I want to admit to channeling the darkness to go to the gym. Catch Jordan wrong on his way to the gym and he still gets mauled. but like I do 100%. Like I feel like I really try to repress that. Like
that's smart. That's healthy.
It's very healthy.
Repression can be like a kind of negative aspect too. But
not for that.
It was like one of the. Well, maybe compared to the giant bellows.
I assure you, stoking the flames.
You know what? I was okay. I gotta be careful about the details here. I was recently like at a conference, and I didn't actually realize I did this until right now, Adam. When you just prompted me to realize that I had done it. I literally imagined a more senior person at an institution that is relevant to mine. I have no connection with this person, but like I imagined him thinking lowly of my talk. And that made me like so angry and
there you go.
And so focused that I tried to like, I just like channeled that. And I honestly didn't even realize that I did it until kind of like right now.
Yeah.
See, that motivation structure doesn't work for me very well. Like I think like it can flow. No, like honestly, like I think that kind of like channeling leads more to like self-loathing for me. Like that underground section.
Interesting.
Yeah, no,
that's completely opposite incentive structure. Yeah. So I've developed that for that reason. Like there's been no utility for me of imagining these things.
I think I'm also like, we all know this because I read like the comment sections under videos, but I'm also like a bit of a rageaholic.
Yeah. So I'm the opposite. I literally cannot stand. I'm allergic.
You know what's interesting is this is again a thing where I think I've actually like shifted in a weird way. I used to be so much more of a rageaholic. Like I would hate listen to shit. You know what I mean? Like I would hate listen to like apologetics and all that. And it's not that I don't partake in that occasionally, but it seems to be way less frequent for me now. But
only when you're at the gym or on your way.
But it's actually kind of like the Dostoyevsky violence thing. It's not even that I don't have that anymore. It's that my horizons have broadened. Like it's almost like a frequency thing. Like there's so much more to listen to or like to read or indulge in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that impulse is still there. It just doesn't get surfaced as much.
That's true. And that can be kind of like how should I say this?
It could be a bad thing too, because I would get like super motivated by like hating how stupid this idea was.
See, it doesn't work for me like that, but I do. I mean, it does occasionally, but not as much for me. I was gonna say, like, I guess this leads back to the point, with the violence. It's like we have been in an environment that is more conducive towards like efficient channeling of these things, right? I mean, that's kind of like the institutions we develop are for that purpose. So like Adam, I think you brought up the point earlier. It seems like we actually are successful with these institutions in large ways. And Dostoyevsky maybe was just living in the time where like he was seeing conflict during a change instead of just like the result. But like we're not the same in that regard. Right.
Yeah.
Like we can get all of us related to all of like these kind of feelings that we were describing, but all of us can kind of, devise like these structures around them and channel them differently or tailor an environment to like lessen the frequency like Jordan was invoking. I was never a rageaholic though. I couldn't do it. Like for me, it was like in almost every aspect, like, hobbies, just like music listening, like everything was to like tone it down.
Ooh.
That was, just me.
Yeah.
No, I won't reiterate the same things, but yeah, I'm not on that spectrum. It's not even the same bell-shaped curve.
You're truly on a different curve.
There's a separate curve for rageaholics, and what percentile am I there? So
Amongst the spectrum of curves, you're on the far right curve and on the far right of the curve.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you guys take? Because it's never explicitly discussed, really, unless I missed it, which is possible. What did you guys actually take underground to mean?
So the way I kind of viewed it a little bit was it was almost like an analogy for him, because you got to keep in mind that like he went to go visit the West right before writing this, right? So he wasn't exactly exposed to many of these Western ideas circulating at this point. He didn't really know how far along scientifically we were at this point. So he kind of arrived, and The Origin of Species just came out in 59, right? So he would have been exposed to the idea of evolution. The idea, I mean, like, how crazy
That's
would that
a
have
big
been?
shift, yeah.
Recall that 3 years before The Origin of Species came out, they found, the remains of Neanderthal man. That was like in 56. So, I mean, this was like a moment of like burgeoning scientific discovery, with a lot of people taking away a lot of different ideas from it that he didn't even know about. So he pretty much showed
worldview shifting kind of observations.
So like here I am kind of like located almost like in the back corner or underground, like in Russia. And like you kind of like emerge up and see like what people are talking about, what's been discovered. And it's like, you kind of like hit the brakes for a second with this book. So, or novella. So
I didn't view it like that. That's interesting though. So whenever I was reading it and kind of, well, you just asked the question, but I think it was more like estrangement in an ironic kind of way, considering what he kind of rebuts against in some ways. But it's the I don't know to what extent, because I had read this like almost a year ago now, 9 months maybe. I don't know what part of this is informed by my reading of part 2, which we haven't read. Well, we haven't read for the this episode yet. But to me, that's kind of what it is. It's the idea of like the changes that you described, Adam, like that have started to come, to Russia and to the world, is causing some estrangement within society. And that's kind of like, if you're in this kind of like changing period, and Dostoyevsky maybe he's willing to admit positive aspects of the change, but he's trying to like pull the brakes in certain aspects of like the consequences that people are trying to like bring upon. So it's kind of like being underground is like a consequence of like observing things but going too far, and like there's the internal tension that develops that estranges you from society and some aspects of yourself, which is the individuality.
And also kind of piggybacking on what you just said right there, I thought you brought up like actually the first point you had there with the estrangement. That's really good too, because he was definitely isolated in his views, actually, because as you pointed out, like What Is to Be Done was extremely popular in Russia at that time.
Yeah.
So he would have been like a minority opinion when writing this, number one. And number two would be, I kind of just recalled like a quote, obviously I'm not going to get it exactly right, but when he was describing himself as sort of like a hedonist and what he could be there, he was saying, isn't that better to be described positively in these negative times? So I kind of gave that some thought. You remember that quote?
At least he was saying like at least that person has an ethos of some sort.
Exactly. Where he kind of sees this population where people are living lives in that time period where they're not really defining themselves in any like distinct way with positive attributes. So I think he's also seeing himself in isolation there too. So that kind of,
They're like in that Marxian sense, cogs in the machine.
Yeah.
Especially in the Industrial Revolution era. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, because Adam, you had like a kind of a societal answer. Giffin had an interpersonal answer, and I almost interpreted this as like an intra-personal way of being underground, where like you might imagine that sort of obviously within like a lifetime, but any given amount of time, weeks, months, years, something like that, you can sort of live a more underground life or not, where you might imagine that if things aren't working out for you and you're really struggling, that you would be more prone to be captured in these kind of thought puzzles or seemingly inescapable paradoxes about your life, and you can't really escape that. And that would be a very underground feeling. Whereas if things are going well and you're sort of a man of action within your own life, like, there's the positive feedback loop of where when one thing goes well, you can sort of reap the rewards for other areas of your life, and in that way live less underground.
I think your answer is probably the most accurate, actually, because he said that he's been an underground man for 40 years.
Yeah, so and especially in light of part 2.
And he's 40 years old, so he's saying, I've been an underground man my whole life. So I've been this hyper-conscious, kind of self-doubt.
Very neurotic.
Exactly, like that's who I've always been. So so it's probably that. Yeah, but there are a lot of different things.
I liked all the way.
Yeah, it's informed by like the layers.
Yeah, I know. I liked that we all had different layers of interpretation there.
Do you want to call it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we talked about it to a big degree. Maybe the absolute last thing at the end where he talked about sort of why he's writing this, and he almost talked about like to clear his own conscience in a way, almost, or to sort of like self-examine. That also seemed congruent with the idea that he had lived his life in that intra-personal or psychic underground sense, where he's like, I was almost viewing a lot of the beginning part of this, like part 1, as just like, because he talked about the page before that. He says, every man has some reminiscences which he would not tell to everyone, but only to his friends. He has others which he would not reveal even to his friends, but only to himself, and that in secret. But finally, there are still others which a man is even afraid to tell himself, and every decent man has a considerable number of such things stored away. Anyway, I have only lately decided to remember some of my early adventures. Till now, I have always avoided them, even with a certain uneasiness. Now, however, when I am not only recalling them, but have actually decided to write them down, I want to try the experiment whether one can be perfectly frank, even with oneself, and not take fright at the whole truth. And that actually makes me think he's kind of viewing this as like a radical experiment in, I said earlier, this seemed like almost a stream of consciousness. And that's exactly what you would do if you were trying to see how honest you could actually be.
Oh, definitely. That's why I was saying, without a doubt, Rousseau's confessions contributed to, what part of his goal here, even though, at the very end of like part 1, he does agree that ultimately, Rousseau did lie about himself, because every man is bound to lie about himself when telling of himself. But yeah, no, I totally agree that was part of his goal. And it was definitely a response to the liberals of the period. Because I think, I don't know exactly where, but at the very end, right around where you read, he was saying, I will not contribute a stone to the Crystal Palace, in the sense that I don't know the exact context for that, but the way I read it was that even my silence in this case would be, contributing to the construction of this Crystal Palace. So I think his goal is to, kind of do everything he can to prevent that from happening. So
yeah. Okay, I enjoyed the discussion of part 1. I'm looking forward to part 2,
was good.
Which will take on a more narrative form. So, all right. I hope people found that entertaining, if not enlightening, and join us next time for part 2. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Plato's Cave. I always enjoy discussing topics with these two guys. So if you want to support the show in any way, you can do so simply by sharing it. I'm hoping to get this show out to more people. And so if you want to share it on Twitter or social media, that would really help me. You can also rate it on Apple Podcasts, like this video if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe via Apple Podcasts or an RSS feed. You can also discuss it on your own show and link back to my website, or you can connect me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can get in contact with me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers, and I now have a website for my philosophy endeavors at jordanmyers.org. If you want to know a little bit more about me and my fellow co-hosts, as I said in the introduction, I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, where I studied mechanical engineering and philosophy, and now that I'm back at school, I'm hoping to more closely study moral responsibility, free will, ethics, epistemology, and moral psychology. Those are topics that I was introduced to and got really interested in my undergrad work. So Adam and Giffin accompanied me on this show, and Adam is one of my oldest friends. We actually met in kindergarten, and we've been interested in philosophical topics for as long as we can remember, and in a lot of ways it's been the basis of our friendship. Adam studied chemistry and biology at Cornell, and he is currently working at a law firm. And he's especially interested in moral responsibility as well, but also law, religion, and free will. Giffin is also one of my oldest friends, and we've been friends since elementary school as well. Giffin studied biology and economics at RPI, and now he works in human health research. He believes that there's very interesting overlap between both of his fields of study and philosophy, and he's particularly interested in exploring political philosophy. So this series was right up his alley. And with all of that information, again, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you get in contact with me or follow my work in any way that you deem reasonable to do. So with that, thank you for listening.